안녕하세요. 코트라 방산센터 박평론차장입니다. 오늘 개최하는 한미 방산기술 협력 방안 웨비나는 지난 1월 말에 개최한 K-TEC 드론 UAV 웨비나에 이은 정보 전달형 웨비나입니다. 지난 1월 웨비나에서 패널 토론을 실시간으로 진행하면서 연사 발표와 달리 자막이 없었던 점에 불편하다는 의견이 있었습니다. 그래서 오늘 개최하는 웨비나는 연사별 발표뿐만 아니라 패널 토론도 사전 제작으로 자막 번역을 제공합니다. 오늘 발표와 토론 영상들의 편집은 외주가 아니라 제가 직접 한 것입니다. 예산 절약이 된 것도 맞지만 코트라 직원의 DX 역량을 높이는 방향이라는 점에서 과감히 도전했습니다. 그리고 2022년부터 본격적으로 진행되는 디지털 로드쇼에서는 그런 역량을 더 발휘하려고 합니다. 디지털 로드쇼는 해외 출장이 어려운 시기에 우리 중소 중견기업 임직원이 연사가 되는 사업이고, 로드쇼 시청자는 해외의 바이어로 마케팅형 웨비나입니다. 많은 참여 부탁드립니다. 오늘 진행되는 내용과 관련된 궁금한 사항이나 제안 또는 의견은 실시간 채팅창에 남겨주십시오. 감사합니다.
안녕하십니까. 방위산업 비즈니스 가이드 바이 워싱턴 방과후 웨비나에 오신 여러분들을 환영합니다. 저는 오늘 사회를 맡은 코트라 워싱턴무역관 진중현 차장입니다. 반갑습니다. 최근 코로나19 팬데믹으로 어려운 상황 속에서도 기술 협력을 기반으로 많은 기업들이 보이지 않는 곳에서 빠르게 움직이고 있습니다. 그래서 오늘은 뛰어난 기술을 보유한 우리 기업들이 어떻게 미국 방산시장에서 그 무대를 넓혀갈 수 있을지에 대해서 연사분들을 모시고 얘기 나눠보는 시간을 가져보려고 합니다. 오늘 웨비나는 우선 연사분들의 발표를 시청한 뒤에 패널 토론을 통해서 심층 내용을 다뤄보는 순서로 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 연사분들과는 상황에 따라서 후속 상담회를 개최할 계획도 가지고 있으니 웨비나 이후에도 지속적인 관심 부탁드립니다. 그럼 연사분들 발표에 앞서서 오늘 좋은 자리를 마련해 주시고 또 적극 지지해 주신 코트라 워싱턴무역관과 방산물자교역지원센터 코디치에서 인사 말씀을 해주시겠습니다.
안녕하십니까. 코트라 방산물자교역지원센터장 이귀현입니다. 오늘 혁신기술 미국 방산시장 진출 웨비나에 참여하고 계신 우리 기업인 여러분께 환영과 감사의 인사를 드립니다. 아울러 연사로 참여해 주신 미국 국방부의 코리 비버슨 대령님, 데프테크의 게리 에반슨 박사님, 그리고 이번 웨비나를 준비하신 워싱턴 무역관에도 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 오늘 웨비나에서 다뤄지는 미국의 FCT Foreign Comparative Testing 프로그램은 미국에서 생산되지 않는 동맹국의 장비와 기술을 시험평가하는 것으로 미군 무기 조달 시장 진출을 위해서는 반드시 거쳐야 하는 프로그램입니다. 유럽 등 방산 선진국들도 다수 참여하고 있으며 한국 기업도 최근에 유도 무기 분야에서 해외 비교 시험에 통과한 바 있습니다. 오늘 연사님들께서는 FCT 등 한국 방산 기업의 미국 시장 진출에 필요한 조건과 방안에 대해 전문가적 식견과 경험을 여러분과 공유해 주실 것입니다. 코로나19가 가져온 변화의 물결은 우리의 비즈니스 활동에 새로운 기회를 제공해주고 있습니다. 방위산업 수출을 지원하는 저희 코트라, 코디치 방산센터도 이러한 변화에 발맞춰 온라인의 강점을 10분 활용한 다양한 수출 지원 서비스를 우리 기업에게 제공하고자 노력하고 있습니다. 오늘 웨비나를 통해 한국 방위산업 대기업은 물론 중소, 중견기업, 그리고 방산 스타트업들까지도 미국 시장에 진출할 수 있는 시발점이 마련되고, 미국도 혈맹 국가인 한국의 우수한 기술력을 가진 기업들을 통해 고품질의 합리적인 가격의 방산물자를 조달하여 미국의 국방력이 더욱 강화되는 계기가 마련되길 희망합니다. 오늘 웨비나에 참여해 주신 연사님 그리고 청중 여러분들께 다시 한번 감사드립니다.
안녕하십니까. 코트라 워싱턴 무역관장 박지웅입니다. 오늘 저희 워싱턴 무역관에서 준비한 한미 방산기술협력 웨비나에 참석해 주신 여러분들을 환영합니다. 얼마 전 한미 양국 정상께서 두 손을 맞잡고 굳건한 동맹 관계를 다시 한번 확인해 주신 데서 알 수 있듯이 한미 두 나라는 이제 경제 전반과 방위 산업에 있어서 단순한 비즈니스 파트너십을 넘어서서 오랜 시간 우정을 나누어온 동반자로서 함께 해오고 있습니다. 특히 두 나라가 세계 10대 무기 수출국에 나란히 이름을 올리고 있는 방산 강국이라는 점이 그 우정을 더욱 특별하게 만들고 있습니다. 팬데믹이라는 전례 없는 위기를 만나 전 세계가 잠시 숨을 고르며 체질을 개선하는 이때 글로벌 밸류체인 협력, 디지털 트랜스포메이션, 그린 뉴딜 등 글로벌 경제는 기술 협력 중심으로 빠르게 바뀌어 가고 있습니다. 이러한 때 국방 기술 협력 분야에 뛰어난 역량을 갖춘 미국의 두 기관에서 시의적절한 메시지를 전달해 주시는 것이 이번 웨비나 개최의 의미라고 할 수 있겠습니다. FCT는 미국이 보유하고 있지 않거나 이미 국내에서 생산이 중단된 제품 중에서 기술적으로 특별하고 미군의 기능 향상에 도움이 된다고 판단되는 제품을 선정, 미 국방부에서 샘플을 구매하고 테스트를 거쳐서 미국 국방 조달 시장에 참여할 수 있는 기회를 부여하는 제도이며 육해공 등 각 미군에서 참여하는 프로젝트 팀으로 운영이 되고 있습니다. 특히 저희 코트라 워싱턴 무역관과는 오랜 협력 관계를 기반으로 유수의 한국 기업들과 대면 상담, 화상 상담을 진행해 오고 있습니다. 뎁테크는 미국 메릴랜드주에 소재하며 미국 정부, 특히 국방부에서 개발한 기술 중 상용화 가치가 높은 기술에 대해 민간 부문으로의 시장 확대를 지원해 주고 있습니다. 두 기관과는 오늘 웨비나 이후 한국 기업들과 후속 화상 상담회를 개최할 계획을 가지고 있습니다. 코트라 워싱턴 무역관은 미국 군사, 정치, 행정의 중심이자 전 세계 방위 산업의 메카인 워싱턴 DC 지역의 지정학적 특수성을 발판 삼아 단연간 미국 방산 거점 무역관으로 활동하고 있사오니 많은 기업들의 관심과 참여를 부탁드립니다. 감사합니다.
네, 인사 말씀 감사드립니다. 그럼 이제 본론으로 넘어가서 연사분들의 발표를 차례로 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
My name is Corey Beaverson, and I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to present the Foreign Comparative Test Program to COTRA for their technology webinar this year. I'm a colonel in the United States Air Force, and I'm assigned to the Office of Secretary of Defense, where the Foreign Comparative Test Program is executed or run from. The mission of the Foreign Comparative Test Program is to find, assess, and field world-class technologies to enhance the military capabilities of the U.S. Department of Defense and to provide long-term value to the warfighter. We see this as a unique opportunity to really capitalize on the good ideas that come from our allies and partners. We've long said that the U.S. does not have a monopoly on any good ideas. The technologies that we tend to look for are mature in nature, and they should also, we look for some sort of savings in cost, schedule, or performance. Additionally, we look for new or novel innovative approaches to solving a shared problem in defense. We see the Foreign Comparative Test Program as really an opportunity to connect foreign industry with our allies and partners to the Department of Defense acquisition system. We also believe that this strengthens alliances and serves as an opportunity to source world-class solutions, serve as a two-way street to defense acquisitions, and increase interoperability not only for the U.S. but also for our allies and partners as well. So I mentioned previously that I was assigned to the Office of Secretary of Defense. In that role, our team at that level, we select projects for the Foreign Comparative Test Program. We also have peers at each of the service levels that execute those programs or those evaluations. So we'll talk more about that as we go through the presentation. We'll introduce them as POCs, and these slides will be made available for reference later on. The FCT program has been around for over 40 years. We have invested over $1.4 billion from the OSD level, or the Office of Secretary of Defense. This has led to the procurement of over 280 projects that have fielded into the U.S. warfighting community. These projects represent over an $11 billion investment in foreign industry. So there's quite the incentive for industry of our allies and partners to participate in defense acquisitions in the U.S. On average, an FCT project will accelerate the fielding of a capability by 3 years. This is overstarting that capability or that technology ourselves in an organic fashion. We believe that the FCT project enhances the U.S. industrial base. We say this because roughly 1/3 of the companies that field projects through the FCT program either establish a footprint here in the United States through their own company or by partnering with an existing defense partner. We believe that this enhances the U.S. industrial base because we are able to build more resilient supply chains, not only here in the U.S., but also through our foreign partners. On average, the projects that we fund are between $500,000 a year and $1 million a year. We tend to look for projects that we can evaluate within a 1 to 2 year time frame, and that speaks a little bit to the maturity level of the technologies that we're looking for. We typically will look for specific technologies. That could mean a system, an entire weapon system. It could mean a subsystem, or it could mean a very specific, component that's utilized in a much broader system of systems. The types of technologies that we look for through the Foreign Comparative Test Program span a very wide range. We look at hundreds of technologies each year, ranging from medical care devices to small arms ammunition to full-up weapon systems. It is a very, very broad spectrum that we look at. We typically, of those hundreds of technologies that we review each year, we will typically neck those down to 60 or so initial proposals. Those will get further necked down into 30 or so final proposals, and we'll select 10 to 15 of those for funding from OSD. This occurs on a cyclic process, and it's an annual process. We'll talk more about that in a moment. As I mentioned previously, we look for more mature technologies. There's a rating scale that we reference. It's called the Technology Readiness Level. It's a scale that ranges from 1 to 9, with 9 being the most mature, 1 being the least mature. Typically, we're looking for projects that are at a TRL 6 or higher. That means that we might be looking at a system or a technology that operates mostly as designed, but still needs some evaluation to ensure that it operates as designed. Or it could mean that we are looking at a system that has been validated that it operates correctly, but we need to look at it in a more representative environment for its intended use. And finally, the most mature would be a system or technology or capability that is already fielded with Allied forces in a very similar manner that we're interested in. So those basically represent the levels of maturity that we're typically seeking with foreign comparative tests. It's important to point out that many of our FCT projects are side-by-side evaluations, so they're comparisons. That could mean that we could have multiple South Korean companies with a similar technology that we're evaluating, or one South Korean company and a European company from Germany or the UK or France, and so on. It could also mean that we're evaluating a South Korean technology against an existing US technology. So there are typically these side-by-side comparisons where we're really attempting to find the best capability that represents the best value for the U.S. warfighter. Focus areas for this year. These focus areas are driven by a number of lenses that we look through. So when we are looking for specific FCT projects, we are looking through a number of lenses, or we have a number of inputs that are driving us down particular paths. One of those would be stemmed or sourced from our national defense strategy. Recently, the latest national defense strategy for the U.S. has identified a need to shift from regional conflicts to much broader peer-level conflicts. that shift has driven a need to modernize the U.S. military in a number of modernization areas. There's 11 of them. You can search those on the open internet if you just pick your favorite search engine and find or search for DoD modernization priorities. They're listed on the chart there. I won't read them all, but this represents one of the lenses that we look through. So there are things like space, microelectronics, 5G, hypersonics, biotechnology, directed energy, and so on. Another lens that we look through for FCT selection is what are the needs of the current combatant commanders. So the folks in Indo-PACOM or the folks in EUCOM, they list what their specific needs are. We will reference those needs as another lens that we're looking through. The modernization areas that we are looking through and that are still there, that are listed for 2021, those are the same modernization areas that have been in place for 2020 as well. We have not updated those yet. But at the end of the day, we're really looking for technologies that represent a value that's provided to the U.S. warfighter. It serves some sort of operational need, it has a relevant fielding schedule, and it also represents a savings. The FCT process itself, what we have here is starting at the upper left-hand side of the chart, you have the cyclical process. So we'll start in the winter time where we're really scanning all of our allies and partners and understanding what sort of technologies they have in play and what sort of development programs they have in play and how that may be useful to the U.S. We do that global technology scan through a number of avenues. In some cases, it's venues just like this. We also visit trade shows. We have international travel and a number of other instances. After we go through that global technology scan, we'll start to develop initial proposals. That's that 60 or 70 or so proposals that I talked about previously. We'll further refine those to 30 or so, and then we'll finally do our project selection to select 10 to 15 new projects each year. At any given time, we have projects selected in the previous year continuing to be evaluated. So we typically have 50 to 60 projects ongoing at any given time within the FCT program. Moving over to the right side of the chart there, you see the selection criteria that I mentioned previously. From an Office of Secretary of Defense point of view, we are looking from the top down. So we are looking through those OSD priorities and those focus areas. We're looking for whether or not it satisfies a joint need. By joint, I mean an Army, Navy, Air Force, and Space Force, Marine Corps need. We're looking for cost avoidance and long-term value, and we're looking for alignment to those combatant commander needs as well. The services, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we have peers at each of the services. They get a voice in this process as well. They're looking for what their service mission need is. They're looking for sponsor endorsement. So the point of an FCT program, an FCT project, is to evaluate a specific capability or technology or system, and if that evaluation is favorable, our goal is to get to a decision, a decision to procure that capability. So the services are looking for that sponsorship for procurement, assuming that it's going to be a favorable evaluation. The services are also looking at things from a risk point of view, cost, schedule, and performance. How mature is the particular project or capability that we're going to be evaluating? What would the procurement strategy be in the event of a favorable FCT evaluation? And so on. Moving across the bottom of the chart there from left to right, you really see that 1 to 2 year FCT timeline that I mentioned previously. So at the very beginning, as you can imagine, we're starting with contracting and funding efforts. Once we have articles to evaluate here in country, we will go through the evaluation phase, and then at post-evaluation, we'll go through a reporting and closeout phase. But moving to the right, our goal with FCT is really to get to that procurement decision. That's where the rubber meets the road, and we are going to decide to procure a capability or not if it's not favorable in nature. As I mentioned previously, this is a cyclical process that occurs on a yearly basis. That being said, we do have the opportunity and the ability to short circuit this whole thing if there's a desire or a need to satisfy some sort of operational requirement or urgent requirement. We can go very fast in this process, but notionally speaking, we follow this yearly timeline. How do you work with the FCT office? The primary way is through communication and contact. One way of communicating is through a product template, and we'll talk more about that product template in the coming slides. But that product template is the basic who, what, why, when, where of your particular project or capability or technology. Think of that product template as a business card that gets your capability and your company and your technology into the door with the Foreign Comparative Test Program. It is a standardized template that allows us to rapidly compare multiple companies and multiple technologies or capabilities, so we can get to that selection process and decide which ones we want to develop into full proposals. Another way would be marketing materials. With marketing materials, it's much like you would find at trade shows, whether that's a simple business card or whether that's some sort of product brochure and so on. You can meet with our team individually, both at the OSD level and also at the service level, and we'll have those contacts later in the presentation. I mentioned previously that we attend trade shows, whether they're things like Modern Day Marine or the Paris Air Show and so on, but we attend lots of trade shows. We have in a pre-COVID environment, we had a lot of foreign travel as well, that we would go and visit companies in country at the point of manufacture as well. And finally, there's industry days that are set up by the embassies here in DC. So we have strong relationships with our allied and partner embassies, their defense attaché staffs and the trade cooperation staffs. So there's a number of ways to get into the calendar, if you will, with the Foreign Comparative Test Team. So here you see an example on the upper or on the right-hand side of the chart. You see an example of that product template. And as I mentioned, it's identifying kind of the basics about your company, the capability or technology itself, how it works, basic contact information, how it is currently employed, is it fielded with other militaries or not, how mature is it, and so on. It's essentially it's a way to help us understand, how the system works and how to get in touch with you if it satisfies a particular need that we have in the U.S. We have a website that you can find. I won't read the address, but it's there on the chart. That particular website does not require any sort of specialized access. It is available on the open internet. This briefing should be posted there as well. You can also contact the Security Cooperation Office, the attachés for the U.S. Embassy in your own country. You can contact your country's embassy here in D.C., the Defense Attaché staff or the Trade Cooperation staff. Finally, you can contact us directly. And as I mentioned, we'll have those POCs in coming charts. There at the top of the chart, you see the folks from OSD. So from the OSD team, you have myself, Mr. Jeff Lipsky, Mr. Mark Morgan, Mr. Sean Hilber, Mr. Jeremy Vipperman, and Mr. Darius Watts. And then you also have POCs from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Special Operations Command. I would like to point out that the Navy folks also represent the U.S. Marine Corps, and the Air Force individual, Mr. William Reed, also represents the U.S. Space Force. Historical examples of successful FCT projects. The Naval Strike Missile. This is an example of a full-up weapon system that was evaluated through the Foreign Comparative Test Program. This was in partnership with Norway. It was originally intended to be deployed upon littoral combat ships and was done so successfully. It has since morphed or pivoted from that application to a ground-launched variant whereby the Army is utilizing this system for mobile land-based anti-ship fires. And it looks like we're going to continue utilizing this weapon system in that regard as well. So very successful program over a number of years, and this again represents an FCT project that was a full-up weapon system that we evaluated. The high-pressure pure air generator, this is a perfect example of a subsystem that was evaluated through the Foreign Comparative Test Program. This project was in partnership with the UK. It was originally intended to be used as cooling air for infrared missile seekers, and has since morphed from that to a number of other applications and is deployed on a number of airborne platforms. So again, another successful FCT project, in this case a subsystem level project. The Special Operations Forces Combat Assault Rifle, or the SCAR, this would be an example of a small arms ammunition or a small arm that was already fielded in other militaries prior to FCT. But another good example of an FCT project, this one in partnership with Belgium, whereby we buy a small weapon and it is fielded currently and still fielded with Special Operations Forces. And I believe that is the last slide. Yes, so I'm happy to field any questions through whatever means we have to get questions back to the Foreign Comparative Test Program. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity to share this piece of defense acquisitions in the United States, and I'm very hopeful that we can find and connect to novel South Korean technology, because I'm sure that there are good ideas that can serve the U.S. well. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you about the different ways in which you can potentially work with the US Department of Defense. I am Dr. Gary Evans. I am the Executive Director of the Maryland Defense Technology Commercialization Center, and I will say a little bit more about that in a minute to explain what the center is and how we work with companies, and then I will talk through some more specific information about how companies may engage with the Department of Defense. So this is a summary of what I'm going to talk about with a little bit more detail. I've just done the introduction. We're going to look at the two main areas in which companies can potentially work with the Department of Defense. That is procurement of goods and services, and also through working with research laboratories and engaging in technology transfer. I'll talk about the scale of the opportunity with procurement and an overview of some of the existing activity that is taking place with Korean companies. And then I'll talk in a little bit detail on technology transfer and how that works, and how, in principle, Korean companies could participate in that process. And then at the end, I'll just give a brief summary of the key points that I've presented. So this is a little bit of information about the Defense Technology Commercialization Center. It is an initiative of the state of Maryland. The Maryland Department of Commerce is the organization that's responsible for the center. And we shortened the name of the center to DefTech, which you can see there in the top corner of the slide. And so throughout the presentation, I will probably refer to the center just as DefTech. And the mission of DefTech is to create sustainable economic growth by assisting entrepreneurs to create and grow successful companies by leveraging the intellectual property, the facilities, the equipment, and the expertise that exist and are available through the federal research laboratories in Maryland, and in particularly the Department of Defense research laboratories. We have 14 public and private sector partners that work with us and support our activities. One thing I do want to say at this point is none of the information I'm sharing with you is confidential. All of the information that I am going to share regarding federal agencies is all in the public domain, and I will provide some internet links for you to look at subsequently. This chart shows, in summary, what we do at DefTech. We engage in a lot of outreach to companies and raising of awareness about the opportunity that exists within the federal laboratories, and in particular, the Department of Defense ones. Even in America, even in Maryland, where many of these labs are located, people don't necessarily know what happens there or what resources are available. And so it's very important for us to reach out to people and explain to them what those are and how they can access them. So a large part of what we do is about providing information and networking with companies and with individual entrepreneurs through a variety of events and direct meetings to achieve this raising of awareness. We also do quite a lot of work to build a community. So we're not just talking to companies one-to-one, we're actually connecting them together. And we have an online community, what you might call a community of interest, which has over 500 members in it, most of which are based in Maryland, but not all of them. And we communicate information out through that group to them. We also engage in a lot of education and training. As I say, a lot of people don't know what exists within the federal labs, even if they're local to the labs. And so we hold a lot of group meetings, we run a lot of educational programs and training for companies to understand what's available. And we have a separate website which we use to promote those, and anybody who would like to is welcome to participate in those. The final thing we do is we offer one-on-one support to individual companies and to entrepreneurs to help them make connections with the federal labs, to help them access the resources that are available there, and to give them information on the kinds of tools and techniques that will actually be useful to them in engaging with these resources. And we also provide mentoring on a one-on-one basis with companies to help them navigate through that process. And underlying all of that is we commit some of our time to identifying new needs and developing new resources to meet them. And so what we do is not completely static, it's continually developing, and we hope to keep it up to date and relevant to as many people as possible. One of the resources that we developed is shown here on this slide. It's rather small, but it shows the homepage of a database which we created, which contains all of the patents that are currently available through the Department of Defense, through the DoD labs that exist in Maryland. There's about 1,800 patents on there, and the website has a reasonably sophisticated search facility on it, so that if you're a company, you're interested in finding patents that may be relevant to what you do, then it should be fairly easy to identify those. If somebody finds something on the website that they're interested in, they can then contact us, and we will work with them to see if it's possible for them to connect with the relevant laboratory and potentially to license the patent, or otherwise engage with the group that actually developed the research on which the patent is based. So, as I said in our initial mission, our purpose really is to help create and grow companies. And if you've been involved in developing technology and developing products based on technology, you will know that the whole process, starting with research to having a finished product on the market, is a long and complex one. And we cannot support that entire process. What we focus on is the initial part of the process, helping companies and entrepreneurs develop their ideas, analyze the market, and develop plans on how they could develop a company, or if they have an existing company, how they could use that to develop a new product or a new service, and to make informed decisions about whether or not to proceed. And then, assuming that that is a positive decision, they'll engage in the product development process. As I say, there are many more steps in the process that a company has to go through to get a product to market, and we're very well aware of those, but our focus is on those first few stages of the process where we're trying to help people take a technology and develop a plan for how they can commercialize it. So moving on to procurement. This slide gives a very simple overview, the scale of activity that takes place through the US Department of Defense. As I said earlier, this is all information which is in the public domain. None of this is restricted in any way. So in 2021, so far $728 billion has been committed by the US government to cover all activities of the Department of Defense. The procurement component of that is approximately $63 billion. Now, in this context, procurement means purchasing goods and services from companies, from private sector companies. There are very few areas, very limited areas, where the Department of Defense actually develops its own products. Almost always, they're required to purchase the resources they need from the private sector. So the procurement piece is about purchasing existing products and services. There's also a larger component, which is has a value of about $162 billion, which is to do with supporting the operations and the maintenance activities of the Department of Defense. I am going to give you a little bit of information about the procurement piece, but there may also be opportunities under the heading of operation and maintenance. So in 2020, there were 447 Korean companies that received contracts, procurement contracts, with the Department of Defense. I found this information on a publicly available website, which I can share later, which details at the individual contract level all of the purchasing activity, not just of the Department of Defense, actually, but the entire US government. But I was able to find that there are 447 companies that currently have contracts with the Department of Defense, a total of a little over the 6,000 individual contracts across those companies. And the total value of them is $3.16 billion. Like I say, this is all public domain information. So it's clearly possible for Korean companies to engage with the Department of Defense and win procurement contracts from them. However, the procurement process used by the Department of Defense is very complex, even for US companies. The government is aware of this, and there are various initiatives underway to try and simplify it, but there's no way of avoiding the point that the procurement process is complex. It can take a long time for companies that are not familiar with the process just to understand it, and even longer to be successful in winning business. Many companies, particularly smaller companies, choose to work as subcontractors to larger ones. This actually makes the procurement process simpler for them because they're effectively selling to a much larger company that already has a contract. That's still not necessarily a simple process, but it's probably simpler than trying to directly bid on a procurement opportunity and win a contract directly. The critical thing with all of this activity is to have a unique product or service that meets an identified need that the Department of Defense has. The department is very, very needs driven. So they look for solutions to problems that they have identified. That doesn't mean it's impossible to sell other things to them, but it's much harder. So the solution is to find where there are opportunities to sell to the DoD that meet one of the needs they've already identified. So how do you do this? Well, there are actually many service providers that exist in the US solely to help companies understand and obtain procurement contracts and then to manage them. The management of the contracts is a separate task. And again, that's part of that quite complex process. And there are many, many of them, particularly in the part of the country that I'm based in, close to Washington, D.C., where obviously there's a big focus on government activity, and they're very easy to find just by Google searches. Even for American companies, it's advisable to use their services if your company is not familiar with the process. I don't want to sound unreasonably negative, but it is difficult to understand the process and be successful with it if you don't have assistance, if you've never involved yourself in it previously. There is information available for free through the main government website, which is used for not just procurement contracts, but managing all kinds of contracts with the government. The URL is very simple. It's just sam.gov, as it shows on the slide there. There are also many companies that provide search services for a fee, but actually the government system, which is very comprehensive, is free to use. On the next slide, I will just show you a couple of screenshots of the site. So this is a screenshot, very recent one, of that sam.gov website. It's relatively clear. You'll see right in the center of the page when you go there on the landing page right now, there's this box that appears that says all of the functions below are on this site. You can register your company, you can look at specific contract details, and particularly on the right-hand side, you can search for contract opportunities, and you can look at other aspects of managing contracts with the federal government. With the next slide, I'll show very briefly what the search function looks like. And this is it. It's very simple. You can put in keywords, you can apply filters, you can search within different government agencies, you can search for particular products or types of services, and then you can see what opportunities are open at that point in time that you may be able to pursue and bid on. So really not very difficult to use, at least to find potential opportunities. So I want to change emphasis here to talk about research and development. As I said earlier, my organization is here really to work with people who are looking to work with federal government research laboratories to develop new products. And those products could be things that the military wants, or they could be things for any other market. And depending on the circumstances, there may be very few restrictions on what other markets a technology could be used for. As I said earlier on, overall, this year, $728 billion has been committed, covering all activities of the Department of Defense. The section of that which is relevant here is called Research, Development, Testing and Evaluation, which is known as RDT&E. If you do anything with the federal government, and particularly with the Department of Defense, you will find that they use a lot of acronyms, and you will become very, very familiar with those if you do engage with them. The budget committed to RDT&E for this year is just under $100 billion, and the vast majority of that goes to the federal laboratories. There are approximately 100 research laboratories across the US, and they cover a very, very wide range of science and engineering disciplines. When I say approximately 100 research laboratories, I mean 100 Department of Defense research laboratories. The number of federal research laboratories as a whole is much larger than that. As I say, they cover a very wide range of science and engineering disciplines. It might not be everything that you could think of, but it probably is. And DoD research laboratories are granted something like 600 patents per year. So they're building up a very, very large body of intellectual property, all of which is in some way related to the interests of the department, but it may not be something that they choose to do anything with, and it may certainly be something that an outside company could possibly license, or maybe just work with the inventors to develop something new. So looking at federal research laboratories as a whole, most federal agencies that undertake research and development are required by law to have a technology transfer office. And a technology transfer office is just an office within the laboratory that is responsible for finding potential licensees for patents, identifying companies that might be suitable for cooperative research and development projects, and other potential ways in which companies can engage with the laboratory. So the entry point for any federal research laboratory is typically the technology transfer office. The main departments that have research labs and technology transfer offices are the Department of Defense, which is primarily what we're talking about here, but also the Department of Energy, Health and Human Services, NASA, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Homeland Security, which is focused on national defense, the Department of Transport, and the Environmental Protection Agency. All of those have research laboratories, and all of them are engaged actively in research and may present opportunities for companies to work with them. So to give some more detail to this, I have 2 slides which list the Department of Defense research labs located in Maryland. So this is not all of the DoD research labs, just those that are in Maryland, where DefTech is based. There's a very large laboratory, which is the home to the US Army Combat Capabilities Command, where they undertake a vast amount of research. They employ over 10,000 scientists and engineers just at that one location, and they cover an enormous range of technical disciplines. As you can see there, anything from chemistry and biological defense through to sophisticated cyber security, computation, communications, all within that one location. You'll also see that there's a number of Army labs that are focused specifically on medical topics. And so you can see there's the Medical Research and Development Command, there's a Chemical Defense Institute for Medicine, and various others which you can read on the slide. There's also an Environmental Health Research Lab, and even behavioral and social sciences. And this gives you a sense of the range of activities that the department is involved in. It really is much, much, much broader than what people often think, that it's just about weapons. They cover many, many other areas. The second slide shows the other DoD labs in Maryland, which relate to the Navy. The names of these I could explain in more detail, but it would take a long time to do so. So I'm just listing them here to illustrate how many there are. All of this is work that is for the benefit of the Navy, but again, it may not be as specific as just looking at particular weapons. And as you see there, there's even a Naval Medical Research Center as well. So the message I want to give you here is just in Maryland, there are literally tens of thousands of scientists and engineers working for the Department of Defense on an incredible range of technical subjects. And they have a huge range of resources in terms of facilities and equipment, and also the expertise of the staff, which is very, very comprehensive and very deep in the areas in which they work. And providing access or helping people to access those is essentially what we do at DefTech. Now, there are obviously some limits on that, which I'll talk about in a second. The 2 main ways, though, that you can work with any federal laboratory, but particularly the Department of Defense ones, is through licensing patents. The process of licensing a patent is much as it is in any other context. And the second one is cooperative research and development agreements, which are known as CRADAs, because that's the acronym you get from cooperative research and development agreements. Patent licenses are relatively straightforward. As you might do with a university, you can go to the lab and say you would like to license a patent from them, and you can negotiate a license to do that. The CRADAs are much more open than that. It's possible to identify an area of expertise within one of the laboratories and then to develop a program of work jointly with them that is going to help them move forward their objectives and also help you with your own objectives in a non-military context. CRADAs, there's a very, very large number of CRADAs that are put in place by DoD with different companies, and it's a very effective way of leveraging all of the resources that are available at the labs. I should say there are some other types of agreements that the labs are able to enter into, but they are for very specific circumstances, such as including materials for transfer of materials for testing purposes. And I don't think it's sensible to go into all of those in fine detail, because most of the time it's patent licenses and CRADAs that will be relevant to companies. There are ways in which you can make it easier to work with federal labs. It's generally beneficial, I think, to have a business presence in the US. I don't think it's strictly a requirement, but it can make things a lot easier. You can seek advice and guidance from federal and state government trade organizations. And at the lower end of the slide there, I've highlighted the Maryland Department of Commerce, which provides assistance to companies in establishing a US presence in order to do business, not specifically with the federal labs, but certainly including those. As I said, that there are export controls that exist. I am not an expert on that subject, but I've included 2 links there which provide some information specifically in relation to South Korea, and also more generally about providing training for people to understand what the export controls actually involve. And as I said, it's possible to get a lot of assistance even from the US government, but also at the state level, particularly from Maryland. So the summary of what I've talked about. There are certainly many, many ways to work with the US Department of Defense and other federal agencies. One of the main ones is through procurement, and that offers opportunities to sell existing products and services to the department. Technology transfer is the other main route, and that offers opportunities for collaborative research, which may be for military purposes or for civilian markets. As I said, the processes can be complex and time-consuming, but many Korean companies do have business with the DoD. It's also the case that there may be export controls that apply in relation to some technologies, but a lot of assistance is available both from the US federal government and from state governments. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I look forward to have the opportunity to talk to you.
정말 유익한 내용으로 알찬 발표 꾸며주신 연사분들께 다시 한번 진심으로 감사드립니다. 이어서 화면을 바꿔서 연사분들과 코트라 워싱턴 무역관의 전태리 팀장님을 모시고 더 많은 대화 나누는 시간을 가져보도록 하겠습니다.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chari John, a marketing director at the Kotra, Washington, D.C. First, I'd like to thank everyone, especially Colonel Beaverson and Dr. Evans, on behalf of Kotra, Washington, D.C., in participating in Kotra Defense Technology webinar. We sincerely thank you for spending some time with us and sharing your presentation for our client, small and medium-sized enterprises, with opportunities with the Foreign Comparative Testing Program and Maryland Defense Technology Commercialization Center. Now that our technology clients have been informed of these wonderful opportunities, we'd like to have a moment of discussing some additional points from your presentation. I'll ask about 5 questions for each of you on some key points for further discussions. And I'd like to start in the order it was presented. So that would be our Air Force Colonel Corey Beaverson from the Office of Secretary of Defense first, followed by Dr. Gary Evans from Maryland Defense Technology Commercialization Center. Colonel Beaverson, again, I'd like to thank you for giving us your precious time in spending with us to tell us about your Foreign Comparative Testing Program. You have talked about various maturity stages of technology product in terms of technology readiness levels. I believe we have many of excellent technology candidates with maturity level over 6. Actually, my first question for you is, what is the process or the next steps once a company's product or technology has been selected for testing? What is the procedure following the selection of testing? Is it contractual?
Hi, thank you very much, Terry John, and thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about the Foreign Comparative Test Program with you. To answer your question, if a product is or a technology or system is selected for a foreign comparative test, after selection, the next process can become contractual with the company. It doesn't have to, but the process itself aims to gain access to the technology or to the article or the system, so we can begin that comparative test. And our desire would be to compare that technology or that system in a relevant environment. Oftentimes, that means bringing that system or technology back here to the United States, where we have the appropriate program offices already set up to do that comparison. Provided that there's a favorable review of the system or technology, we would also like to potentially employ that in a more representative environment. That might mean an operational exercise or some other venue. But the initial steps can be contractual, they don't have to be, but ultimately our desire is to gain access to the system, the technology, or the product itself, so we can do that comparison.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Connor. I'm sure that, your name comes comparative testing, that comes from there, I think. But, thank you very much. I'm sure that your answer will help Korean companies to understand the whole process if their technology are selected for testing. And Dr. Evans, first of all, on behalf of KOTRA and our technology SMEs, thank you for your excellent presentation and sharing with us the great advice and the opportunities offered by Maryland Defense Technology Commercialization Center. My Korean technology SMEs are looking for partners or an organization such as yours who can help small and mid-sized technology entrepreneurs with the right kind of advice for the U.S. defense market. My first question for you is there any way the Korean technologies can be listed in your database? If yes, what are the steps to register to your database?
Well, thank you. Let me say first, thank you again for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about the work we do at the Maryland Defense Technology Commercialization Center. It's a great honor to be able to share what we do with Korean companies. But to answer your question, at the moment, the database is specifically for patents that are granted to the Maryland-based DoD research labs. And so it wouldn't be possible for Korean patents or Korean technologies to be added to that database, but it would certainly be possible to create a different database specifically for Korean patents. The system is designed so that it could be replicated, but it would be beyond the scope of the Defense Technology Commercialization Center to add any other patents to it that did not come from DoD.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Evans. I think we should discuss a little more about this topic later.
Certainly.
All right, just going back to Connor Beaverson, this is my second question for you. Many people are just worrying about this IP, intellectual property, just what happens, the company's intellectual property of the products. Are companies' IP protected? Or if it's protected, please share with your policies on IP.
Hi, thank you for the question. So yes, it's a very common question in the Foreign Comparative Test Program. And I would like to just state emphatically that intellectual property is protected during the evaluation process. So there is no concern or desire for the U.S. to take advantage of any intellectual property that may be resident in a Korean technology or system during the evaluation. Now, the goal of the Foreign Comparative Test Program is to get to a decision to procure a system or a technology, and then ultimately field that. During that procurement process, if the comparative test is favorable and we decide to go ahead and procure, then the idea or the IP that's associated with the system or technology becomes a point of negotiation. So in some cases, that IP it becomes government purpose rights, and in other cases, the company itself retains it. But that is all negotiated with the company in the procurement process.
Oh, thank you. It's very clear explanation. Your explanation will give a peace of mind for the companies who are actually worrying about this technology not being protected. Thank you very much. And then going back to Dr. Evans, my second question for you is, are there any successful cases you can share for commercialization by transference of technology through your center? Or do you have any internal cases like commercial technology to DoD part?
Yeah, certainly. I'll be glad to answer that. And it's a good question because it illustrates two different situations. The first one is if a company licenses intellectual property from the Department of Defense. And I can give two examples of that. I can't provide the names of the companies because that information is confidential, but I can give you an overview. So one example is an entrepreneur who licensed software technology from the US Army Medical Research and Development Command. And he has actually started a company to develop a medical device based on that patent. And so that's taking a technology from DoD and commercializing it. And it's really for a civilian application, but it's possible that the final product might also be of interest to DoD. Another example is a company that licensed a patent which relates to a new technology for cooling electrical equipment. And again, they licensed that from the US Army Research Laboratory, and they're developing a product for a commercial application, not for the Department of Defense. But the second part of your question, I think, was related to if a company has technology and they would be interested in working with DoD, and that's certainly possible. One example is a company that we have been working with that has a technology for decontaminating surfaces to make sure that there are no bacteria on them. And this is something that the company has developed itself. It owns the intellectual property. And just like the other speaker was saying, the company keeps their intellectual property, but they work with the DoD laboratory to develop that technology more and to find ways to make it apply to problems that DoD has. Now, in that situation, if new intellectual property is created, it's likely that that will be jointly owned between the company and DoD. But anything that the company has before that belongs completely to them. And so just as you were saying before, they should not be concerned that they would lose the rights to what they already have.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Evans. I know that intellectual property is just everyone's concern these days.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much for all the examples and then cases you share with us. And then I'm going back to Colonel Beaverson about third question. What are your policies or trade regulations on procuring Korean products, like Buy American Act, Barrier Amendment, and some other restrictive regulations on foreign products applied to these cases?
That's a great question, and it is it's very reasonable to ask that type of question, especially in light of some of the news that you might see from our political administration. What's important to point out or remember about the Foreign Comparative Test Program is that we have been authorized by Congress in National Defense Authorization Act law to conduct our mission. So we are authorized by Congress to specifically go out and acquire foreign materiel for the purposes of fielding within DoD. So yes, the Buy America Act is there. Yes, there are other defense acquisition related items like the Barry Amendment that sometimes get in the way of accessing foreign material. But in the case of the Foreign Comparative Test Program, we have a very specific paragraph in the National Defense Authorization Act that gives us that authority to conduct our program. And then again, if it's a favorable evaluation, then go ahead and move on to procurement activities and field those systems later on in the field. Just by way of sharing what that means, that we have invested over the programs that have been successfully transitioned and fielded to the military represented over an $11 billion investment in foreign industry. So it's quite the carrot. That's over the history of the 40-year history of the FCT program. So there are a number of examples where we've done just that, in spite of those other regulations that are in place for good reason. We don't go around them. We just have a specific authorization to conduct our mission.
Oh, thank you very much. Everyone in just foreign country is just worrying about, maybe DoD has a little more barriers than other part of, USA market, but just you give them a little bit of hope that, maybe they can just not like apply for that compliance, the part, at least working with the foreign comparative testing program. That's just good to know. Thank you for the explanation. And my next question for Dr. Evans. Do you have any advice for Korean companies in finding cooperative R&D opportunities with the DoD or other non-governmental organizations?
Yes. So at a broad level, I think there are a lot of opportunities for companies from outside the US to develop cooperative R&D programs, not just with DoD, but as you say, with other organizations within the US and certainly with US companies. I think that in my experience, the critical thing is for both partners to be very, very clear about their objectives and what it is that they're looking for from the other organization. If there's a clear understanding on both sides, it makes it much less likely that there will be any problems. And it's important to take the time initially to make sure that the complete understanding is there. It can sometimes be difficult to find the right partner, but there are certainly ways to do this by searching patent databases, using other information sources, most of which are available online and some of which are actually free. They have no cost to use them. So from the point of view of the strategy, if you like, it's important to plan ahead. But I think if a company wants to do business in the US, regardless of whether it's with the federal government or with a private sector company, my personal view is that it's the best way to do that is to establish a business presence in the US. I think US companies, US organizations are often quite cautious, quite careful about doing business outside the country. And it makes it much easier if they're able to deal with somebody who's based in the US and with a business which is actually a US business. And so I think for non-US companies, it's relatively easy to establish a US subsidiary. And I think that is the best way to approach that whole area.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. I know that, you know, just if somebody wants to do the business in the US, the best ways doing business is just being here, like just a presence in this country is
Yes.
going to be just a good just asset for their just doing business in this country. I know that, and then, you know, your advice will just give them maybe, you know, think about moving their at least a subsidiary in this country. Yeah, just you know, maybe you and I needed to just work together later on for just, you know, cooperating, collaboration, or, you know, that kind of stuff together. Right?
Certainly.
Yeah, thank you very much for the just explanation. And then just moving back to Colonel Beaverson, my fourth question is, are there any history or any current Korean product being tested by FCT? If yes, any kind of product were tested or procured after passing the test? All right.
Yes, we've had roughly 16 projects, Korean projects that have went through the Foreign Comparative Test Program. We have 5 that are ongoing right now. 2 of those that come to mind that are, I think, of particular interest are it sounds kind of odd, but there's a concrete project that we have going on with Korea right now that is of particular interest because it helps. We believe that it'll help us rapidly repair and construct infrastructure such as repairing runways and other types of infrastructure like that. So that's an evaluation that's ongoing. We look forward to seeing how those results shape up. And then another one that is of particular interest is a small diameter rocket that is intended to defend our naval assets when they're in a littoral environment. And that particular rocket system, we believe, fits a gap that we currently have. So we are looking to continue that evaluation, and hopefully that shows out as a favorable one as well. So those are 2 that come to mind of the 5. There's been roughly a $15 million investment in Korean industry through these projects. So absolutely, we look forward to, we're thankful for the opportunity we've had, and we look forward to continuing to grow that.
Thank you, Connor. That's very encouraging. You know, I know that how many just projects are selected by year, but you said it's 5 ongoing projects with Korean companies. That's a lot. You know, I'm so happy to hear that. And then I'm sure that just our audience is happy to hear that too. And then, you know, that's sort of encouraging from you to just apply to the FCT program, I think, in the future. That's very good. Thank you very much. And then just moving to the 4th question to Dr. Evans. Does your center do any counseling or help with foreign companies who are looking for business footprint in the US?
Again, that's a very good question. The Maryland Defense Technology Commercialization Center is very focused on its specific mission, which is to help companies engage with the DoD research labs, and as I said earlier, either license technologies or work with the research labs to do new technology development. And so if a Korean company was interested in doing those specific things, then we would be happy to work with them. I think your question was a little wider than that, though. And so it would be outside of the mission of the Defense Technology Commercialization Center to work with non-US companies just to help them establish a footprint here. But there are many other organizations, particularly in Maryland and around DC, that can help companies do that. And I would be quite happy to advise people separately from the Defense Technology Commercialization Center to help them find the right connections for that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Evans. That is something that it relates to our just previous question that just, many of Korean company wants to do the business in the US market. I think they should just, at least just have certain presence in this country is going to be plus to the business in this country, I think. Yeah, that's just really good advice. And then I maybe need a little more advice from you in the future. Maybe I can just ask you, or just I'll have a Korean company just contact you directly to get some advice on this topic.
Of course, yes.
Fifth question for Colonel Beverson. If a Korean product has been selected, but FCT deemed it to be either a prototype or just not up for scaling up, does FCT help facilitate in finding US partner that can fill in the scale up gap?
Thank you. It's a great question. So yes, part of the FCT selection process is finding that partner. The products that we select and the technologies that we look to fund for comparison, that partnership with the service, whether that's the U.S. Navy, the Air Force, Army, Marine Corps, or Special Operations Command, and now Space Force, whether it's we look for a partnership in one of those services. If we don't have that, then it's unlikely that we would move forward with a comparative test in that particular case.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. That's, again, it's very encouraging for just, Korean companies who are not quite there yet. Maybe, they only have just technology and the prototype. Maybe, they can just get help. If it's a really good technology, I'm sure that you guys will help just finding some partners in this country, right? All right, thank you. Thank you very much. And then Dr. Evans, it's a question for you is, do you have any advice to share for Korean companies who wants to do the business in the US defense market? What are some of the barriers and what hard is it for Korean companies to enter into this market? What are some of the pathways to this market if feasible? Is it too long or?
Right, sorry, I haven't unmuted myself. No, that's very good. So I think the way to answer the question is just in a sense to step back a little from defense specifically, and just say actually working with any organization as large as the US government is always challenging. And that's not a criticism of the government, it's just because of the size of it as an organization. And it's just as true for US companies. They find it difficult just as much as non-US companies do. And it's one of the problems is that because the government is so large and the Department of Defense, which is only part of the government, is also so large, it can be very difficult to find which part of DoD the company should be talking to, and then which people within that part of DoD they need to talk to. Because like any business activity really, all of these things rely on interaction between people, and you have to find the right person. So going back to what we were saying earlier on, I do think it's important for companies to have a presence in the US because it just makes it easier for a lot of reasons if you're based in the country. Then you can do the things you need to do, which is to attend meetings, attend events, build up personal networks, which then will help you find the right people to connect with. And like I say, this is exactly what US companies have to do as well. And so it's the same process, but it's just much easier for a non-US company to do it if they actually have a base here. The government is genuinely interested in finding companies that have problems that the government is trying to solve. And the Department of Defense is very open about which problems they are trying to solve. You know, it's possible to look on websites, the government websites, and find lists of their priorities for technologies that they're interested in. And so they're very open about that, but it's still a requirement to invest time to try and find the right pathway in, if you like. Now, there are organizations like the Defense Technology Commercialization Center that will help companies do that. And within the Washington, D.C. region, there are actually many of them. Some of them are public sector organizations like the Defense Technology Commercialization Center. Some of them are private sector companies whose business is to help non-US companies find the right door. And so and again, I guess I don't want to repeat myself, but you know, it's this question of investing the time and learning about the whole organization and the system to find then how to get to the right person. And as I say, it's the same actually for US companies. They have to do exactly the same thing.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Evans. You know, one thing sure that just the right contact is right within us. I think Colonel Beaverson is the right person to talk to, right? That's just really, really, really just close to us. And then, you know, Dr. Evans, just thank you very much for your advice that, yeah, we needed to just invest our time to just work on it a little bit more. You know, we needed to just prepare. It doesn't happen overnight. Just everyone knows about that. So, you know.
Actually, the research labs that are based in Maryland, the DoD labs, do have special events that, you know, where they'll have a whole day for companies to show technologies, to meet with people from the lab. And so they're very receptive to companies, you know, working with them, but it's just that question of finding the right person.
Yeah, that's great information about it. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sure that we needed to talk, you know, it's not all. We needed to just continuously talk about just how we can just collaboration together in the future. And then, you know, thank you very much. And we have nearly come to the end of our discussion session today. Is there any final thought you would like to share, starting with Colonel Beaverson?
Oh, thanks. So final thoughts for me are just a thank you again to our friends at the South Korean Embassy, to COTRA as an organization. Thanks for the opportunity to share one way to interface with Department of Defense acquisitions, and we look forward to continuing the partnership. And I'm hopeful of the projects we have ongoing. I'm hopeful for favorable outcomes. That is our goal. Our goal is to help solve gaps in defense capability, and we're hopeful that we can do that with Korean products.
Oh, thank you very much. How about you, Dr. Evans?
Well, actually, yes, I just like to thank you again for providing the opportunity to connect and to talk to Korean companies. And I think the message I would want to leave you with is that, I think there is a lot of opportunity. It's obviously a little more difficult for non-US companies to engage with DoD, but it's certainly possible. And I think there are great opportunities. And the DoD most definitely is very open to working with companies to find solutions to the challenges that they are making a priority.
Yeah, thank you very much for both of you just giving us encouraging advices. Thank you very much for your time. And this concludes our discussion session. If there are further questions from Korean companies, I will just have them contact you directly with the contact information on the presentation file. Is it okay with you guys? I'll just have them contact you directly.
Certainly, yes.
Yeah, okay, all right, that's good. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you again for just taking your time and just give us wonderful the advices. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
네, 잘 들었습니다. 다시 한번 연사분들 좋은 말씀해 주시면 감사드립니다. 발표 내용 이외에도 더욱 많은 부분을 알 수 있게 된 유익한 시간이었던 것 같습니다. 웨비나 시청자 여러분들께서도 좋은 참고사항이 되었기를 바랍니다. 그럼 이것으로 오늘 준비한 웨비나는 마치도록 하겠습니다. 앞으로 방산물자교역지원센터 그리고 코트라 워싱턴 무역관에서 지원하는 다양한 프로그램에도 우리 기업들의 많은 관심을 부탁드립니다. 그럼 저는 여기서 인사드리겠습니다. 참여해주신 모든 여러분들께 진심으로 감사드립니다. 감사합니다.
나 요즘 화장품 회사 해외 영업팀에서 일하잖아. 근데 해외 지사가 없어서 수출이 너무 어렵고 힘들어.
일찍 왔네.
왔어? 무슨 고민 있어? 표정이 왜 이렇게 안 좋아?
요즘 헬스케어 제품 개발해서 수출하려고 하는데 시작을 어떻게 해야 할지 모르겠네. 시장 조사는 어떻게 하는 건지. 해외 바이어 유치가 쉽지가 않아.
고민이 많아 보이시네요. 노래 한 곡 들어보시겠어요?
무엇부터 시작할지 고민하고 있나요? 해외 진출 원하나요?
수출 초보 중소중견 스타트업 모두 다 해외 진출 첫걸음 코트라와 시작해.
바이어는 어떻게 찾지 고민인가요? 혹시 해외 시장 조사가 필요한가요?
해외 지사가 없어서 고민인가요?
수출할 수 있어 코트라와 함께.
저희는 중소기업인데 해외 지사가 없어서 바이어와 연락이 어려워요. 혹시 코트라가 도와줄 수 있나요?
전 수출 초보 기업인데 무엇부터 시작해야 할지 모르겠어요. 정말 코트라가 수출 상담을 해주나요?
저희는 해외 현지 마케팅 전략이 부족해요.
코트라에서 해외 시장 조사를 도와줄 수 있나요?
해외 진출 필요할 때 코트라와 함께. 수출 초보 중소중견 스타트업 모두 다 소비재 소부장 프로젝트 모두 다 수출을 원한다면 코트라와 함께. 모두 할 수 있어 코트라와 함께. 전 세계 어디든 코트라가 있잖아. 해외 진출은 코트라와 모두 함께. 누구든 어디든 Go try with 코트라. 수출을 원하면 Go try with 코트라.